Basically, when you are going into initiation, you will have a blindfold tied around your eyes, and then you will be brought into the ritual space for the initiation. This represents you literally being blind, being spiritually ignorant, lacking information, lacking insight. And then when the ritual begins and you are initiated in, or your initiation starts, or you actually reach the point where you're, say, taking an oath or taking the point of transformation, that blindfold will be removed, showing that your eyes have opened, you have gained spiritual insight, and you understand now the mysteries. Or alternatively, you are ready to now see the mysteries. You are ready to see the thing you are being taught. You are ready to see and face the tradition that you are stepping into.
Greetings from the Pacific Northwest. You're listening to Symbolic Studies, episode 18. I'm your host, Mario, once again joined by my lovely wife, Michelle. Today we'll be discussing the symbolism of magic. That's right, in addition to our monthly show on astrology, we are now starting to explore symbolism beyond the zodiac. So for this first episode, we're going to be talking about magic symbolism, which I'm really excited to get into. There's so much to talk about. If you're new to the show, we play voicemails from special guests and listeners like yourself. If you'd like to have access to early and exclusive content, please consider becoming a member on Patreon or elsewhere. Links can be found at symbolicstudies.com. But before we dive deep into these voicemails, Michelle, my lady, how are you?
I'm very excited, and I love this topic. And when I think about the symbolism of magic, my mind goes right to folk magic and the traditions that have been around cross-culturally for decades and generations, and how people have viewed magic and used magic in their daily lives. And I just think that there's so much to talk about, and it's a broad subject, but it's really awesome to think about these pinpointed parts of magic and what they all mean to people around the world.
Right. Yeah, no, there's so much to get into with this topic. You know, we've both been interested in magic for a while. I've been interested in occultism for a long time. And while I'm not a practicing magician per se, we all are magicians in our own way. Let's not forget that the first card, the Major Arcana, is the Magician card right after the Fool. So I think that says quite a bit. To help us dive into this discussion, I've invited a few guests who are steeped in various magical traditions, and I can't wait to hear what they have to say about this. To kick things off, we got a voicemail from returning guest, Georgina Rose.
When I think about the symbolism of magic, there's kind of a set of symbols that I think about a lot, but I think are not discussed as widely in the occult community and are just kind of implied to be understood. But these symbols are one of the most common sets of symbols you are going to encounter when you explore magic, particularly ceremonial-based magic systems. And that is basically the symbolism of covering and being uncovered. So that's going to be your ritual implements like a veil, a headscarf, a robe, a blindfold, and nudity. So let's kind of go through these and what they represent, because what you put on, what you don in ritual is a set of symbols that you are embodying and aligning with for a specific magical purpose. So the first of these symbols is going to just be the robe. So when you're doing a ritual, you're going to be wearing something most of the time, and that something needs to correspond with what you are doing. Because when you're doing a magic ritual, basically every single thing that is present in that place is going to be impacting the working that you are doing. Every single thing is a correspondence, including yourself, including your mood, including, the perfume you're wearing. All of that is a symbol set that is going to impact your end result when you are doing magic, right? So what you wear is a really vital one. And kind of the most standard way of doing ritual is to wear basically a black or a white robe. This is going to be kind of the least symbolically involved way to wear something in a ritual, right? It's basically just a single color piece of clothing. Sometimes the way the robe is cut is going to have a specific meaning. The most common one in Western occultism is going to be that towel robe. It kind of looks like a T. But you will see other variants, ones that are flowier, ones that are tighter, and then that can all in and of itself have a meaning. But basically that black or that white is going to do kind of the least in the ritual. Sometimes, the black, since it is the combination of all colors and the white is absence of all colors, those can represent two separate things. Like the black robe can be used in a ritual that's, say, utilizing, correspondences like Saturn. Of course, Saturn is associated with black. And then white can obviously be used for purification rituals. White is kind of the color of purity. But when we go deeper, you can really play with all sorts of colors, right? That whole layer of color is a layer of symbolism. You'll see rituals to, say, Babylon or Inanna Ishtar utilizing a red robe. Or you'll see kind of combinations of things. So you'll see, like in the Gnostic Mass in Thelema, you'll see the female priestess wearing a blue robe representing the colors of Nuit, but with a red sash around her hips, representing Babylon as the concealed name of Nuit. But it goes even further than that. Beyond robes, there's many other ways to cover or uncover in a ritual sense. The next is going to be the headscarf. So when you put a scarf on your head or veil in a way that is not a complete and total veil concealing the personhood entirely, what you are doing is you are representing humbleness, humility, right? This is why if you go to a traditional Latin Mass or a Orthodox divine liturgy, you are going to see women pretty much, I mean, the majority of them are going to wear a veil, something that covers the hair. This could be used as a form of modesty or simply to kind of show yourself as humble and subordinate to the divine. And so when you're doing a really big worship-based ritual, one that is very much about kneeling and coming before a god, that headscarf can be very commonly used. You also will see rituals, and this is really interesting to see, where basically if you're doing an invocation, so you're calling a god into you, you will start with a headscarf or veil over your hair. And then once you've reached the point in the invocation where you fully invoked the god, you actually remove it, showing that you have truly aligned with that god form and fully invoked them. At that point, you don't need that veil. Going further than that, though, there is a complete and total veil, a face veil, literally putting a piece of fabric over your face, completely concealing your features. So what does that represent? So you see this a lot in Islamic traditions, but you do see it sometimes utilized in Western rituals in a specific ritual context or frame. So you basically cover yourself entirely, completely eradicating yourself. And that represents annihilation entirely. That is literally getting rid of the self, getting rid of the ego for a ritual purpose. When you're doing this temporarily, what you are doing is in that ritual, you are showing that you do not exist. You are nothing, but you are part of the bigger rituals. I've specifically seen this used in a really powerful way in rituals to Nuit, who is a star goddess very much associated with these themes of annihilation and surrender. And so people will basically like take a blue cloth and completely cover their body and face, literally showing themselves annihilating into Nuit and using that as a ritual purpose. You also, once again, you can play with this. So you can pull it back, or you can start unveiled and then cover yourself. Once you feel ready to embody that in your ritual, you can really play with it. Another similar thing is going to be the blindfold. So the blindfold is obviously a piece of fabric that covers your eyes. So in pretty much every Western occult tradition, a blindfold is used during initiations. You see this in Thelema, you see it in Freemasonry, you see it in a lot of Hermetic traditions, such as like the Golden Dawn, and you'll even see it in some Wiccan type traditions, where basically when you are going into initiation, you will have a blindfold tied around your eyes, and then you will be brought into the ritual space for the initiation. This represents you literally being blind, being spiritually ignorant, lacking information, lacking insight. And then when the ritual begins and you are initiated in, or your initiation starts, or you actually reach the point where you're, say, taking an oath or taking the point of transformation, that blindfold will be removed, showing that your eyes have opened, you have gained spiritual insight, and you understand now the mysteries. Or alternatively, you are ready to now see the mysteries. You are ready to see the thing you are being taught. You are ready to see and face the tradition that you are stepping into. Another set of symbolism is going to be the symbolism of nudity, or as Wiccans will call it, being skyclad. So in some ritual circumstances, nudity is used as a ritual tool, which is kind of the inversion of these modesty-based images of the veil or the full veil, right? So nudity obviously represents being naked. Duh. But when we think about nakedness, what do we think about? We think about being revealed, being unable to hide, unable to run, forced to show our most intimate forms of ourself. And so ritual nudity basically uses that correspondence set. So if you are nude in a ritual context, it is because you are showing the fullness of yourself. You are unable to hide. You are forced to completely show who you are to the divine, right? You're forced to release that. As well, nudity can be used as a correspondence to dehuman-centric dehuman orient. I don't know the exact most eloquent way to phrase that, but basically detach yourself from your humanness. So obviously we have an egoic attachment to being humans, and we think of ourselves as above animals and above nature. But in a ritual that's really about connecting to nature and connecting to the land, sometimes we want to get rid of that sort of, assumption. And so a way to do that is to remove clothing, just like animals do not have clothes, basically forcing you to become closer to nature, closer to the land, and reckon with that ego attachment when you are doing something very nature-based in orientation. So, another layer of clothing based correspondence you can use in ritual is things you put on your head. So, you'll see crowns used in some ritual contexts, specifically in solar rituals. So, obviously, the sun corresponds to the king, to the ruler, to the leader. And if you are doing a solar ritual or a ritual where a sun god is invoked, often a male ritualist, or even at times a female ritualist, will don a crown representing the power of the sun. You'll also see in some rituals this moon crown. So, this is going to be a silver, like diadem that has a upward facing crescent moon, almost kind of looking like horns. You will sometimes see a priestess wear that to represent the symbolism of the moon on her head. As well, jewelry is an entire layer of symbolism within magic, right? We understand the power of talismans, or specifically objects that we've consecrated for spiritual purposes. And using those can add a whole new layer of correspondence, right? So if you get a golden ring, you can bring in the sun. If you get a silver ring, you can bring in the moon. If you get stones to Mars, you can bring in Mars. Stones to Saturn, you can bring in Saturn. You can make, whole necklaces that have, like, say, the sigil of Hecate on them, and then wear it to bring Hecate further into your ritual. You can really do pretty much anything with jewelry, and that can be a whole new layer of symbolism you can bring in. And so with all this combined, you can create like the ultimate symbolic combination to get the maximum result out of your ritual. You can use, let's create a ritual outfit right now. So you can use a gold robe, you can use gold jewelry, you can get a talisman with a solar sigil on it, you can wear a solar crown, and you can be reasonably covered up, but not overly covered up, because we don't really want to represent humbleness. And then at that point, you would invoke the sun through one of the more kingship associated sun epithets. That would be the ultimate correspondence set for bringing in that noble and ruler based representation of the sun. And so do this for any ritual you're doing. Think about what symbol set works best for you, and then apply that into your ritual. What you wear is such an important part of any ritual. And you don't need to break the bank or do anything crazy to get this stuff. You probably have, honestly, things that are satisfactory in your house. You don't necessarily need to have the perfect robe. You can do it with your own clothing most of the time. So really think about it, really consider it, and try experimenting with what you wear or what you don't during ritual. With that, thank you, Symbolic Studies, for allowing me on. It was really fun to ramble about this. And I am Georgina Rose, or Dot Darling. You can find me all over the internet under Georgina Rose or Dot Darling. And I am the author of the book, Planetary Theurgy, Ascent Through the Seven Veils. With all that said, farewell.
All right, Georgina Rose, thank you so much for that contribution. That was awesome. I'm so glad you picked this lane to explore. It was really fun to listen to. And it's interesting as well, because anyone who follows Georgina online knows that she has a great sense of style, and she really expresses herself through her outfits. Magical garments just in and of themselves is a whole entire weave and rabbit hole. There are numerous myths about magical robes, magical shoes, rings, crowns, things like that. So to me, this is really fascinating, because there has been this idea that you can imbue something with magic, or that there are things out there that are already imbued with some sort of power, essentially. One of the first things I think of is Solomon's ring, and how he used this ring in order to create Solomon's temple. And this allowed him to work with demons and whatnot to create this temple. So that was something that I was thinking about while she was talking about everything. I love the fact that she brought up the veil and this idea of what conceals also reveals. And when I think of this, I can't not think of Virgo. And Virgo symbolism has a lot to do with veil symbolism. And she brought up Nuit, and there's a major correspondence, in my opinion, between Virgo and Nuit, Virgo being the queen of heaven. And the veil in and of itself is intriguing, because the idea behind magic in one way is to reveal layers of self, right? Getting to your true authenticity. Some people might refer to this as your true will or your holy guardian angel. I've been talking lately, because of Gemini season, about your spiritual double or twin, something along these lines. And the veil is something that can be lifted or pierced in order to reveal these different aspects of self. But to be veiled as well, I love the symbolism behind that. She mentioned annihilation, surrender, or being subordinate to the divine. I love how she put that. Hey everyone, if you've been enjoying the podcast and want to explore further, there's an entire archive of exclusive material available through membership at symbolicstudies.com. Over the past few years, I've built a growing library of symbolic lectures, bonus podcasts, and members-only content, including 19 full-length Symbolic Secrets episodes covering the major arcana from the Fool through the Moon card, with the remaining lectures still on the way. New material is continuously being added throughout the year, and members also get early access to every new podcast, including this one. If this sounds interesting to you, head on over to symbolicstudies.com and explore the archive. Membership is only $5 a month and directly supports the show. And with all of that said, back to our episode on the symbolism of magic. Also, as it just relates to magical clothing in general, I can't not think of plays. I can't not think of movies. I can't not think of Hollywood or movie magic as well, right? In fact, probably a lot of people know this, but Hollywood is a reference literally to wood from the holly tree, which in some circles, you want to use that wood for your wand. There's differences of opinion with that, right? And I think the wand is something that I want to explore at some point in this episode. But we all know that Hollywood is able to transform people. And you see them on the big screen, and they may look nothing like that in person, right? But they're evoking a character. They're conjuring up this sort of archetype, right? And so this plays into the storyline that they're trying to create. This creates a better atmosphere for people to be engaged, all sorts of things. And kind of related to that, I think of entertainment and how many entertainers are known for their particular looks. When you say Michael Jackson, everyone probably has an idea of what he maybe is wearing. When you refer to a god, when you refer to any specific rock star or any actor, you may already have this idea of how they dress and how they appear. So I'm grateful she brought up the ritualistic context of what you should wear or could wear for those purposes. But then also we know too, just in general out in the public and with entertainment, how important someone's look can be.
Thank you so much, Georgina. This angle is awesome, and I'm so grateful for what you brought to the table because it's bringing up a lot of thoughts. No one can deny the quintessential woman in a red dress drawing attention to herself, walking into a room and just all the eyes are on her, whether it's women or men or both looking at her. There is magic in that, and people know that. And I think that that's something that can be said about a lot of stuff like this.
Right, absolutely. You know what this reminds me of as well, just something that I have to mention, I think this is the perfect topic to get into it with, is the fact that magic or magi begins with M-A-G. And so does magnetism.
Ah, perfect.
So I think a lot of what magic is about is, in one way, sort of the attracting or repelling nature of whatever it is you're doing and wanting to attract or repel. And so when I see the magician on the magician card, he's holding his wand up to the heavens, the other hand down to the ground. He himself is almost like a pillar. And just like a pillar or a pole, there's a positive end and a negative end, just like magnetism. And that card is ruled by Mercury. Mercury understands his light nature and dark nature. So this allows him to really explore the full spectrum of who he really is. And so we talked about this in the Gemini episode. A lot of mystics and sages and magical type people, they like Mercury because they know at certain points they have to lean into their projective nature, assertive nature. There's other times where they have to be more receptive and they have to be more passive. So basically, to your point, you can wear something that attracts a lot of attention. Conversely, if you want to go and not be seen, or you want to kind of go incognito, you can wear something that actually disguises you as well. And then you're kind of just lost in the crowd or what have you.
Great point. And I have to also mention, too, that this goes for men as well, because as ZZ Top said, every girl's crazy about a sharp-dressed man. And so there is something to be said about a man dressed up very nicely in a nice suit, just looking fine, as you could say. But, you know, there's power in it for both sexes. And I think that there is definitely something to be said about that.
You're absolutely right. And it's just funny that you bring up ZZ Top, who I never think of. But immediately I think of their look.
Oh, yeah.
I think of their long beards, you know, and that was a signature sort of thing for them. And so if they walked around without their beards, nobody would know who they are. There's even a story of Kiss. Kiss wore their makeup for years, and then they tried to go and perform without their makeup, and they released a video without their makeup, and everyone was turned off. Nobody liked it. They didn't care for it at all. So people get attracted to whatever sensibility they're putting out there, and they get used to it. And so then if you change your look or you change your image, it could work out really well for you, you know, and you're kind of leaning into a new direction, or you can lose your audience. So having said all of that as well, you are truly more than just your appearance. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that just kind of needs to be understood or stated. Somebody can look fine, as you're saying, but they're a complete mess.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so we know that this can be the case as well. Someone can look put together, but they're actually a con man and they want to take everything you have. And conversely, somebody can look, quote unquote, like a mess, but in actuality, they're a very in tune, aligned person. So that's kind of the world we're living in as well, in that there's more than meets the eye, essentially.
Yes, I love that you said that, because that's part of the magic of it. It's part of the glamour that is going to allow someone into your life because they looked good, but it could have been the worst decision you ever made, and it was just because they were looking good to you. To circle back to what Georgina was talking about, one of the things that came to mind is an Ayurvedic practice known as Abhyanga. Now, this is done with oils. And so you're covering your entire body in oils. You can do this yourself, or you can go and have a massage like this done. But essentially what you're trying to achieve is a practice of self-love that helps you to ground, and it really nourishes the nervous system. So I think that we can cover ourselves in many different types of things, but this particular practice is something that is so rooted in healing, and I think that there is something magical about that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know what this reminds me of, actually, to kind of connect what you're saying and what Georgina said in the voicemail, this idea of ritual nudity. This reminds me very much of the star card.
Ah, right.
And she brought up Nuit, and she made the reference to being sky-clad as another sort of way of saying that you're nude. And what you are seeing in the star card is a ritual bath. She's preparing a ritual bath, which is basically very similar to what we call baptism today, right? And so that's what baptism is. It's a ritual bath. So you are covering yourself in water, and there is this purification sort of dynamic with that. The interesting thing about the star card as well, well, one, there's all sorts of thelemic sort of tie-ins with this card. And also, in my opinion, we're talking about the star of stars, the North Star or the Pole Star. But what's happening is she's taking a ritual bath, and so symbolically, she is returning to herself.
Ah, right.
Kind of going back to what I was saying about the idea behind magic and sort of lifting the veil and everything else. And so she is nude, meaning that she has nothing to hide. She has nothing to conceal.
I have a quote here to go off of what you're just saying, and this is from Barbara Walker's The Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Symbols. She says, "Magic is a route to virtues hidden in the center of the center." Now, I think of the center of yourself. You could also take it as far as the center of a situation, or the center of a symbol, or the meaning of a symbol, or what have you. But I really think that that's a really great way of explaining maybe what magic is, or what the intention is behind it.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought up that quote, because it caught my eye as well. We've had this book on the coffee table the last few days, and we've been going through it. And when she references that quote, she's actually quoting someone named Walter Raleigh, who I don't know much about. And apparently the full quote, because I looked into it, is, "The art of magic consists in the ability to perceive the virtues hidden in the center of everything."
Dang, that's awesome.
So as someone who's very much interested in center symbolism, that quote definitely caught my eye.
Hey Mario, Paranoid American here. I was just sitting here thinking about what symbolism of magic really means. So I'm a visual person, and when I think about that, I see like a huge collage of images, right? Pentacles, a magic wand with a trail of metallic shimmering pixie dust that defies gravity. I see myself also sitting on the second floor of a Barnes & Noble superstore, reading some random book on Wicca, while side-eyeing that Anton LaVey, but not quite making eye contact to avoid, punishment in the afterlife or whatever. It makes me think of every cartoon I've ever seen, every second that represents dozens of symbols repeating faster than you can blink, and how those symbols come to life with just the slightest changes, and how that spontaneous generation of life seemed to be the most magical thing in the physical world for such a long time for me. And I watched those symbols turn into characters, and those characters turn into friends, and movies into entire universes that kind of coexisted alongside our own. And maybe somewhere between Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and Jesus and Simon Magus and Merlin and John Dee and a wizard cap, right? Mentally, I think I always conjure up that image of a pentacle when someone mentions magic. That's the one with the circle, right? And right side up. I don't know. I never remember the difference. Is there even a difference if it's upside down or right side up? Even the words for these things are magic symbols, like especially the ones that represent abstract thoughts. There's magic alone in being able to describe like a universal experience in a single written word. And those magic symbols that make up words, which are just letters. And those are like ingredients in like a recipe, right? Except the recipe, I guess, has words. So the letters would be like the ingredients to a recipe, but abstract ones, since an actual recipe has physical ingredients too, plus numbers, right? Numbers are important. School made me hate numbers. I mean, it almost made me hate letters and words too, but numbers, man, were like these little rusty nails or sharp corners of Legos you step on in the middle of the night without shoes on. And if only I had the insight then that they were magic symbols as well, I might have cared more, right? Because even though there's like a trace of magic in numbers, the number 2, for some reason, it was blue and it felt familiar. 3 was greenish gold and it felt exciting. Trinity was good magic. 666 is bad magic. But if they're just numbers, then I guess writing them in the order might be magic, like the order of things. Words can be bad, maybe even letters too. Symbols definitely. Hell, just by taking a cross or a star and turning it upside down, you can get in trouble. It's spiritually, but also in school. Like, it can get you detention a few times. Having a symbol on your shirt or like writing something on your jeans could completely change the way the world saw you. And then that turns into a feedback loop that changes how you see the world. So, I mean, here's another version of symbols being magic. And what's the difference between the magic of a symbol, the magic of a letter, a number, a word, or say like a doodle, right? Like in Wicca, I believe you're encouraged to make up your own magic words that have some kind of meaning to you. But isn't a doodle sort of the visual equivalent of just making up a random word? And if you doodle a symbol long enough that it turns into a sketch, and that sketch turns into a character, and the character develops like a set of traits, is that kind of like a magician perfecting a spell? Or I guess a chef perfecting a recipe? And what about a Nokian, right? Like a Nokian is like a more efficient way of listing those ingredients for some kind of recipe that's baked in an alternate dimension. And if Enochian sigils are just condensed magic signals with shapes and letters and numbers, then what would you call a comic book, right? A comic panel can have that same exact Enochian symbol from a Lesser Key of Solomon, but then you can zoom out and show more than that. You can show how the magic manifests into superhumans and supernatural powers, and it makes me think, like, what if John Dee could draw like Jim Lee? Plus, the comic has writing behind all the symbols that you see, so even if the words and letters don't make it onto the page, it expresses even more abstract chains of thought. And a level above comics would be animation. And this is where the animator draws a magic signal hundreds or even thousands of times for just a few minutes of motion. So anyone that dismisses the symbolism of magic or the power of symbols containing life, just by barraging the human senses with hundreds or thousands of images quickly, the senses will convince you that there's life there. So, I mean, look at the earliest versions of animation that we've got in the US at least. You got Snow White wishes into a well and is immediately shown that her magic is so powerful that she runs from it, right? You got Pinocchio, who's this homunculus inhabited by divine consciousness. He himself serves as a symbol that if you sacrifice knowledge to indulge the senses, then you basically lead to a lifetime of horror and manual labor. And his phallic nose gets more erect each time he chooses the material mundane over the divine. Fantasia, you get this subliminal silhouette of Chernobog, the black god, who ends up becoming the silhouette of every Disney villain that comes after him. Look at Bambi. The symbol of Bambi changed politics and environmental policy for decades because of how magic and powerful Disney was at that time. I mean, and all of these stories get boiled down into just symbols, right? The magic of heritage and important lessons for survival in concentrated form. Bambi and Snow White printed onto keychains and backpacks and video games and Lunchables and N95 masks made from petrochemicals. I mean, I guess that makes me think about the form of things, right? Like, is something less magic if it's made from, say, plastic, like a polyvinyl chloride with phthalates, or on a film made of cellulose acetate, or pixels on a screen made from carbon-based semiconductors between conductive electrodes? Or is it more magic if it's engraved on metals and gemstones, right? Are one of those more magic than the others? Does the medium matter? Is the medium the message? So, I don't know, man. Something to consider. What does the symbolism of magic conjure for me? I guess inspiration, taboos that can result in detention or death, depending on the century. Images of mass-produced consumer goods that leave lasting impressions in magic and microplastics. And I guess magic is a little too easy to dismiss as some old belief system from generations long forgotten in superstitions. But there might still be some magic in those microplastics.
All right, Thomas / Paranoid American, thank you so much for that voicemail. That was an awesome stream of consciousness there. No surprise you brought up cartoons and movies and pop culture and things like that. That is absolutely Thomas's wheelhouse. He's done a number of episodes decoding occultism in Disney movies and various projects like that. And it's interesting to me, I mean, just thinking about Disney films. When people think of magic, how many people immediately think of Disney?
Oh, probably a lot.
It's the Magic Kingdom. We have Mickey Mouse as a magician. We have all of these movies that relate to folk magic, as Thomas is saying, and everything else. And so in a way, they've kind of, I wouldn't say co-opted necessarily or stolen this word or anything along those lines, but they've definitely used it to their advantage. And in some ways, you know, part of me thinks that magic in the modern world is sort of the catch-all for spirit. And people throughout different ages and in different cultures and whatnot, they've had these different words to describe spirit. And I just wonder if magic is sort of the modern word that has been sort of adapted this way. And it's interesting as well when you think of Disney movies and whatnot. And Thomas, I'm so glad he brought up just the amount of frames, you know, that it takes to create one of these movies. And I like how he brought up that these images turn into moving pictures, and that these images that were once static are now basically like your friends. And it's this thing that we can all sort of relate to. Your favorite cartoon as a child, your favorite characters in a movie and whatnot. And I think probably most everyone out there knows that Disney is known for putting subliminal messaging in their movies.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of different examples out there, you know, hidden phalluses and whatnot. To me, this is another side of magic, is, you know, putting things in under the radar for people. And when I think of that, you know, I do think of advertising. I do think of propaganda. I think of all of these different types of ways in which your message can get across without you not really knowing that that's what you're receiving. And so the biggest advertisers in the world, the biggest companies in the world, they employ psychologists. They employ people who are specialized in imbuing something with even more meaning behind it, right? And so as a designer, a graphic designer, I know that very well. And I know that the tiniest little changes in the typeface and the color, the photo you decide to use, all of these things can really make a big, big difference. And so Thomas's voicemail just reminded me of all of these sorts of things. I love what he had to say regarding numbers being magical and how if he knew that early on, he would have cared more as a kid. 100%, dude. There's so many things like that that I think of. As an example, we're taught about the different planets as a kid, but you're taught the most boring aspects of these planets. It's made out of this, it's this size, this is how far it is away from us. A lot of it actually has to do with numbers. But to me, the real magic here is the symbolism and mythology and the lore behind these planets. I get way more out of that than all of the things I learned in school. And so that's what I wish they would have taught us in school is, hey, did you know Mars is related to war? Did you know it's related to this and that and the other thing? Not necessarily its size or what have you. So I definitely feel you there. Numbers would be a whole rabbit hole. The symbolism of numbers could be a fun episode.
There you go.
Every single number really has basically a whole volume that could be written about it, especially the first handful of numbers, of course.
Well, all this talk about numbers makes me think about the magic square, and it makes me think of a quote that I have here from Barbara Walker. She says, "The magic square is considered mysterious and magical because of the way numbers could be arranged in it to add up to the same sum across every row, down every column, and through both diagonals." And for me, as a person who feels the same way about numbers as Thomas does and what school made him think about numbers, when I see a magic square and I think about this working, it feels like, oh my God, crazy. How did they do that? And that is the magic in it. Someone sat down and took the time to figure out how is that going to work. So there's like mystery in the magic of it. How did they get that to work? What are the right combinations? And if you aren't a numbers person, something like a magic square of numbers is almost going to feel mind-numbing.
Oh, yeah. And obviously, the relationship between magic and numbers is so deep. But when you consider numerology and gematria, and that a lot of languages basically have a numerical equivalent with their alphabet, that when you're actually writing words and you're putting together combinations of words to create sentences, and then you're creating paragraphs, and then you're creating whole chapters and books, that in a way, if you're doing it the right way, you're basically doing math, and I think some people can definitely get lost in the sauce when it comes to gematria and that sort of study. But it is very interesting because there are a lot of words that have a very potent numerical layer to them if you know how to decode it. And so that to me makes my mind numb. I can kind of wrap my head around the magic square thing, but gematria and sort of doing all of this to create a whole entire work that adds up to a specific number and has all these patterns in it and everything else, to me, that's really wild.
Thank you for your call in, Thomas. I appreciate what you had to say and the humor that you brought to everything. And also, I just wanted to say, you brought me back to my own personal memories of being in a Barnes & Noble when I was a young girl reading books on Wicca and feeling kind of like, oh my God, this is like so exciting. And I knew exactly where the section was and I would go there every time. And I remember being like in 8th grade or something like that. And it was the first place I bought my first tarot deck. And so here I am, this young girl just going, oh my God, this is so cool. And so that was my introduction to magic, if you want to call it that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how magical are books?
Oh, dude.
And so to me, it's just one of those things where coming across the right book or the wrong book can completely change your life. And I can think of a few situations on both ends with different people and myself where a book changed someone's life for the better, or a book actually ended up being sort of detrimental because they followed it too closely or whatnot. So really, I mean, that could be a whole rabbit hole in and of itself as well. And I have very similar memories. My first book on symbolism that I ever purchased was not from Barnes & Noble, but from Borders.
Okay.
And so very similar if
yeah.
people know what Borders is all about. But that was the first time I actually realized that you can study symbolism. I still have this book. It's called Signs and Symbols. And I have it for more nostalgic purposes than anything else, right? Because I have a lot better material now. But it opened up this gateway where I realized, oh man, you can actually do this. You can actually study about any animal you want, any number, any color, whatnot. So it really, really opened me up.
And that's interesting about your book, that you hold on to it for nostalgic reasons, because that same tarot deck that I bought many, many years ago, I still have. And I hold on to it for the same reasons. And I have very fond memories and fond thoughts about that deck. Another thing that Thomas mentioned that is of interest to me is magical recipes. Now, when I think of this, I think of the recipes that we hear about from old magical books or old magical movies where the witches are mixing things in their cauldron, and it's the eye of newt and it's frog legs and it's this and that and whatever, which are usually all metaphor for something else that's a lot more common.
Mm-hmm.
But a magical recipe can be a plethora of things. And as a person who sort of identifies as a, quote, kitchen witch, I guess you could say, this brings up all sorts of thoughts to me, because I love to cook and I love to bake. And I love making my own recipes, and I love finding recipes and altering them and making it into my own. And I think that that's part of what magic is about, is finding things that suit you and then working with what you have. And that is really awesome, because you can just change something that was one way and make it into something that could be better or just personalized for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is alchemy. You're taking different things, different ingredients, and you're combining them, and you're making something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And this art is actually, to me, best sort of encoded in the Temperance card. And so the Temperance card is even, in fact, called art in some decks. In some versions, you see a woman with the cauldron right in front of her. And in the Thoth deck, she's bifurcated, so she's like split in half. And she has this magical cauldron. And she is combining these different elements. And this is what art is about, basically. Crowley was known for saying the first step in any creative process is destruction. And so if you're going to build a home, you're going to have to level some trees. If you're going to cook a meal, you might have to crack a few eggs. But these different pieces, these raw ingredients, can be combined in magical ways. And so every time we're actually creating art, that is basically magic at work. And there's something, depending on what the project is about, but there's something very therapeutic about it. I think of artwork and creating art and being a creative. One of the best things about it is actually the ability to sort of transmute something within. So as you're transmuting something externally, physically, you're also transmuting something within, right? And so this is sort of the bridge between internal alchemy and what people refer to as external alchemy or lab alchemy.
What's up, everybody? I'm Nick, host of the Occult Rejects. On the show, I dig into the places where occult history, religion, ritual, symbolism, conspiracy, and science all collide. My goal is to cut through the surface level takes and get into the deeper mechanics behind belief, magic, initiation, altered states, and the systems that shape how people think and perceive the world. Today, we are going to talk about magical symbolism. Most conversations about sigils, talismans, and magical symbols begin with the assumption that the symbol is aimed outward. The symbol attracts, protects, binds, opens, seals, banishes, commands, or influences something in the world. That is the traditional magical language. But there is another possibility that may be just as important, and maybe even more important for the understanding how these practices actually affect the person using them. Maybe the symbol does not first change the world. Maybe the symbol first changes the practitioner. That does not mean the occult interpretation has to be thrown away. It means the mechanism may be more intimate than people usually admit. A sigil or talisman may function as a technology of attention, memory, emotion, perception, and behavior. It may gather intention into a visible form, then train the nervous system to respond to that form. The magician may believe they are projecting force outward, but the first measurable transformation may be happening inside the operator. In the eye, in the brain, in emotional expectation, in bodily state, and in the way the practitioner moves through reality afterward. This idea is not alien to occult history. Western esotericism has always treated symbols as more than decoration. In Renaissance Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, medieval image magic, and grimoire traditions, images were understood as active forms. They did not merely represent an idea. They organize the imagination around an idea. They train the practitioner to see, remember, desire, fear, and act through a symbolic structure. Giordano Bruno is one of the best examples. Bruno's memory systems were not simple memorization tricks. His wheels, planetary images, symbolic combinations, and mythic figures were designed to build an entire architecture inside the imagination. The art of memory was based on the idea that strong images placed in structured mental locations could organize thought and recall. Bruno radicalized that tradition. His symbolic wheels created layered systems of association where image, word, planet, myth, geometry, and imagination were fused together. In that sense, Bruno was not just using symbols to remember information. He was using symbols to restructure consciousness. That matters because it shows that occult symbolism was already tied to inner transformation. A symbol could shape the faculty that receives symbols. The imagination itself became the ritual chamber. The Ars Notoria gives us another important example. This medieval magical tradition used complex figures, prayers, timing, repetition, and contemplation to pursue memory, eloquence, understanding, and intellectual illumination. The notai, or symbolic figures, were not mainly about attracting love or money or protection. They were aimed at cognition itself. The practitioner used sacred diagrams and ritual language to alter learning, memory, and understanding. Whether one reads that spiritually, psychologically, or historically, the structure is clear. The symbol is being used to transform the mind of the operator. So when we talk about sigils and talismans affecting the practitioner, we are not forcing a modern idea onto older magic. We are recognizing something already present in the tradition. Occult symbols have always operated at the boundary between world and mind, object and imagination, outer sign and inner state. Modern cognitive science gives us another language for this. Perception is not passive. The brain does not simply record the world like a camera. It predicts, filters, prioritizes, and interprets. What we notice is shaped by expectation, emotion, attention, memory, and learned meaning. A symbol repeatedly used in ritual becomes salient. It becomes important. It becomes charged with emotional and cognitive weight. A sigil viewed once may be only a design. A sigil viewed repeatedly in ritual under concentration with desire, fear, breath, color, sound, and expectation becomes something else. It becomes linked to a state. It becomes a cue. The nervous system begins to recognize it. The practitioner does not merely look at the symbol, the practitioner learns the symbol. That is where conditioning becomes important. If someone repeatedly handles a talisman during prayer, discipline, anxiety, devotion, grief, protection work, or trance, the object becomes associated with those states. Eventually, the object itself may help trigger them. A protection talisman may bring vigilance and steadiness. A Mars symbol may prime assertiveness. A Mercury talisman may cue verbal focus. A Saturn seal may reinforce restraint, discipline, and seriousness. The magical object becomes a conditioned interface between intention and behavior. That is not just placebo in the dismissive sense. Placebo research itself shows that expectation, meaning, ritual, setting, and symbolic authority can produce real effects in the body. The point is not that symbols are fake. The point is that meaning has physiological consequences. The body responds to what the mind has learned to treat as powerful. Color adds another layer. Occult systems have always used color as part of the grammar of symbolic force. Red belongs to Mars, blood, conflict, aggression, heat, courage, cutting power. Green belongs to Venus, fertility, attraction, growth, harmony. Blue belongs to Jupiter, order, authority, expansion, and sovereignty. Black belongs to Saturn, restriction, death, boundary, weight, time. White and silver belong to lunar symbolism, reflection, dream, receptivity, memory, and the hidden life of the night. Science does not need to prove planetary magic in order for this to matter. Color psychology shows that color can affect attention, arousal, emotional interpretation, and association. Red often draws attention because it is tied to blood, threat, dominance, heat, passion, danger, and intensity. Blue and green are often associated with lower arousal, distance, stability, calm, or environmental safety, though these effects depend heavily on context, culture, brightness, and saturation. The important point is that color changes the state in which the symbol is received. So when a practitioner works with a red Mars sigil, two systems overlap. The occult system gives the symbol mythic aggression and planetary force. The perceptual system gives the color intensity and salience. The result is not merely intellectual belief. The color helps tune the body toward the meaning. Flashing color takes this even deeper because now the symbol is not only symbolic and emotional, it becomes physiological. Flashing light interacts directly with the visual system. The retina contains rods and cones. Cones are responsible for color and fine detail in brighter conditions, while rods are more sensitive in low light and contribute strongly to peripheral and night vision. When a practitioner stares at colored light, high contrast, or flashing symbolic forms, the visual system undergoes adaptation. This is where after images, complementary colors, visual persistence, edge effects, and retinal fatigue become important. If a colored symbol is stared at long enough, cone response can adapt, and the viewer may see an after image when looking away or closing the eyes. A red image may produce a greenish after image. A bright sigil may appear to remain present after the eyes are closed. Edges may seem sharper. The symbol may appear to glow, pulse, reverse, or float. From the occult perspective, the sigil may seem activated. From the physiological perspective, the eye and brain are adapting to repeated stimulation. Both descriptions are trying to account for the same experience from different angles. Darkness intensifies this. In a dim room, rod sensitivity increases, color perception shifts, peripheral vision becomes more suggestible, and candlelight or flickering illumination can destabilize the normal appearance of objects. A sigil seen by candlelight is not visually neutral. Its edges move with the flame. Its contrast fluctuates. Its form becomes unstable. This can make the image feel animated or alive even before metaphysical interpretation is added. Flicker research makes this even more relevant. Rhythmic visual stimulation can produce altered visual experience, color phenomena, geometric patterns, and shifts in subjective awareness. Gans flicker studies how the flickering visual fields can produce simple hallucinations such as color changes, shapes, and geometric imagery. Other research on flicker-induced hallucinations connects these patterns to the organization of early visual processing. This matters because occult symbols are already geometric, high contrast, repetitive, and emotionally loaded. When a sigil flashes, it stops behaving like a static mark and becomes a rhythmic event inside perception. A flashing sigil is not only read by the mind, it is driven into visual processing through rhythm. Geometry itself is another major piece of this. Human perception is deeply responsive to pattern. The visual system detects edges, contrast, symmetry, angles, curves, repetition, and spatial order. This is not a minor feature of perception. It is one of the basic ways the brain organizes the world. Occult symbols exploit this constantly. Circles, triangles, spirals, stars, grids, crosses, pentagrams, hexagrams, mandalas, yantras, planetary seals, magic circles, and labyrinths are all structured geometric forms. They are not random marks, they are ordered visual machines. Gestalt psychology helps explain why this matters. The mind organizes fragments into whole. It completes broken forms. It separates figure from ground. It groups similar elements. It follows continuity and symmetry. A sigil often works by compressing meaning into an abstract form that the mind must resolve. The viewer participates in the symbol by completing it internally. The symbol recruits the mind into finishing it. There is also evidence that shape carries emotional tone. Angular forms are often experienced as sharper, more threatening, more aggressive, or more energetic. Curved forms are often experienced as softer, safer, more harmonious, or more approachable. This gives occult geometry another layer. A jagged Mars-like figure and a rounded lunar sail do not enter perception the same way. Before doctrine is added, shape already has emotional grammar. Entoptic phenomena makes this bridge even stronger. Entoptic forms are visual effects generated within the visual system itself. It can include dots, grids, zigzags, spirals, honeycombs, radiating lines, tunnels, and concentric circles. These forms appear in migraine aura, flicker exposure, sensory deprivation, pressure on the eyes, hypnagogic states, trance, and other altered conditions. Many religious and occult forms resemble these basic geometries: wheels, rays, spirals, lattices, halos, mandalas, tunnels, eyes, stars, and radiant centers. This does not mean all sacred geometry is just brain noise. It means the nervous system itself is capable of generating forms that human cultures later interpret as sacred, cosmic, spiritual, or magical. Some symbols may feel ancient because they echo structures the human visual system can produce from within. Fractal and natural pattern preferences also matter. Human beings often respond strongly to branching, spiraling, nested, and self-similar patterns. Trees, rivers, lightning roots, blood vessels, shells, clouds, flames, and veins. These forms balance order and complexity. Occult art constantly uses similar structure: rays, branching diagrams, nested circles, spirals, wheels, roots, serpents, and star forms. The mind is drawn to patterns that feel organized but alive. Ritual then amplifies all this. The symbol is rarely isolated. It is placed inside a larger technology of state change: darkness, candlelight, incense, chanting, breath, posture, rhythm, repetition, isolation, group emotion, consecration, timing, and expectation. Each element narrows attention and increases absorption. Darkness reduces competing stimuli. Candlelight destabilizes edges. Chanting and drumming impose rhythm. Breath alters autonomic state. Repetition strengthens learning. Emotion deepens memory. Expectation shapes perception. Ritual is a system for making meaning biologically persuasive. This brings us back to the central point. After ritual, the practitioner may feel the world has changed. And maybe in a practical sense, it has, because the practitioner is no longer encountering it the same way. A protection talisman may make someone more alert, boundaried, and less passive. A love talisman may make someone more receptive, confident, and socially attentive. A Mars sigil may make someone more direct. A Mercury symbol may prime speech, cleverness, and quick association. A Saturn seal may support restraint, discipline, and long-term seriousness. The world may seem to answer the symbol because the practitioner is noticing different signals, making different choices, and acting from a different state. The symbol changes what the practitioner notices. What the practitioner notices changes how they behave. How they behave changes the world they actually encounter. That is the core argument. Occultism says the symbol is charged with force. Psychology says the symbol is charged with meaning. Neuroscience says perception, memory, attention, emotion, and behavior have become organized around a symbolic stimulus. History shows that magical traditions have long used images to reshape memory, imagination, and intellect. Color and flicker show that symbolic forms can affect the visual system directly. Geometry shows that symbols exploit deep pattern processing structures in the brain. These explanations are not identical, and they do not have to cancel each other out. They show different levels of the same phenomena. The occult symbol may not be a remote control for the universe. It may be a control panel for the practitioner. And once the practitioner changes, the world is no longer experienced, interpreted, or acted upon in the same way. And that's enough out of me. Hope you all enjoyed. This is Nick from the Occult Rejects.
All right, Nick, thanks for that voicemail. You covered a lot of ground there. The first thing I'd like to talk about is what you mentioned regarding perception not being passive. And I know Nick has a huge weave that he's unpacked and has done a lot of research with regarding the eye and eye symbolism. And when he mentioned that, I could not think of the eye. And of course, he was talking about flashing lights and things like that, which I want to get into as well. But the interesting thing that I think of with the eye is the fact that it looks like a yoni, right? And so the eye looks like a Vesca Pisces. It has that almond shape. And a lot of people have noted that it does look like a yoni. And whenever you see any shape that has that same silhouette, it is both projective and receptive. So I think one of the things, maybe an occult secret, if you will, regarding the eye is that it's not just receiving, it's actually projecting as well.
Right.
And so just like the yoni, it both receives and projects.
If looks could kill.
Right. Yes, exactly. If looks could kill. And so people even intuitively know when they're being looked at sometimes, right? And so your eye basically projects and receives in a way that I think is not really discussed that often, but I'm pretty convinced there is something going on with that for sure. And then regarding the flashing light and the flickering and everything else, I thought that was really interesting. And so this kind of reminds me of a few things that we were talking about. One, the flickering light of film, of movies, moving pictures, just like what Thomas was talking about. And it also reminded me of fire and the allegory of Plato's cave and sort of these images on the wall that's being cast. from behind. And so just the flickering of fire, just in general, it kind of reminded me of. And then it kind of reminded me, too, of this subliminal dynamic in how in a split second you can put something into a film or into a cartoon, and you may not necessarily consciously pick up that messaging is in there, but that it sure enough is, and it's working on a subconscious level. And that's another thing with magic I think is worth discussing, is that a lot of magical techniques are trying to go underneath the conscious mind. And that the conscious mind in many ways is working against magic. And so this is why chanting and using basic symbols and using these colors, a lot of the things that Nick was talking about, that's why these are standard practices in this experimental field, if you will, because your conscious mind wants to suppress that some of these things are possible. It wants to suppress the fact or the nature of what magic really is all about. And so this is why the tarot is great. This is why the tarot gives you conflicting imagery sometimes. There's some cards, as an example, my go-to card when I talk about this, the card that corresponds with Leo, you would think should show a proud, formidable, warrior-like lion, a strong, healthy lion. But instead, the card that corresponds with Leo is strength, and you get a lion with its tail between its legs, oftentimes. And it's submissive. This is interesting because you would think you would get the opposing symbolism. But I think with the tarot, you're actually getting symbolism that in some ways is in contrast to what it actually represents. And I think that it has to do with this sort of subliminal dynamic. And that if you get the inverse of what you'd expect, that actually is working more on a subconscious magical level, if you will. And just to clarify as well, I say subconscious, one of my favorite authors insists we should be calling it the supraconscious, that it's actually not underneath, but it's actually above. So just want to throw that out there. Hey guys, it's Mario once again. I just wanted to let you know that Michelle and I are now recording companion episodes for all podcasts. So if you're looking for even more insights on magic, keep an eye out for our After Hours release. In After Hours, we continue the conversation and cover everything else we weren't able to get to in the episode. As an example, we're getting into famous magicians, magical births, why the ancients are considered more in tune with magic than modern people, and much, much more. After Hours is for members only, and of course we hope you consider joining. Become a member and get all the exclusives at symbolicstudies.com. All right, back to the episode.
Hey, Nick, it was great to hear from you, and I love what you brought up here because it made me think of a handful of things, particularly when I think of the flashing light stuff that you were talking about. I can't not think of the 1960s hypnotic acid test be-in sort of things where we're dealing with projections of light, projections of like oil being manipulated with colors on the stages. You have people tripping out on LSD, and this is having like a mind-altering effect on them, not only because of the drug, but again, because of the flashing lights, because of the stimuli that is there. And anyone who's looked at this part of history in the Americas and the hippie culture and what was going on with MK Ultra and mind control and things like that, that was the number one goal right there, was to be able to manipulate a whole population of people. And that came through the hippie generation with all the things that I just mentioned. And so that's where my mind goes to right away, because if you look into any of the imagery from some of these concerts, it's disorienting in and of itself, just that. So then put on top of that being on LSD, I mean, I could see how someone might lose their mind in a situation like that.
Right. I can't remember who brought this up, but someone mentioned the fact that these drugs should be called, or could be called rather, suggestogens.
Ah, right.
And so you're more suggestible.
Right.
And there's a whole history with that as well, where you get somebody high on something and then you start feeding them a script or some sort of narrative or what have you. And then they're kind of yours, pretty much.
Big time.
And so that's a great point. I mean, drug use and magic could be a whole entire thing as well.
Oh, dude. I mean, I kind of have some things in my notes about that, actually, because it's totally linked, because we're talking about altering your mind or altering your perception when we're talking about magic in general. In my opinion, with magic, you're allowing yourself to be more vulnerable, or that's part of it. You're opening yourself up to possibilities of things that you may think are impossible or that you're trying to achieve through said ritual or thought pattern or what have you. And so the whole thing with drugs really comes into it, because there's also a whole line of herbal magic that works with using poison plants and things that actually are mind altering and have to be used with caution and have to be used at such low doses that you are going to probably be altered. But if you took too much, it could possibly kill you.
Sure. Right, exactly.
To continue on this point, I was reading through my book, Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult by Chris Bennett. This book is a goldmine, and it's a tome in and of itself. But within this book, he basically is trying to get to the root of magical texts that implicate that drugs were used, but trying to figure out what the actual drugs were.
Right.
So he's going through old books like the Picatrix and stuff like this and trying to decode the language so that he can figure out, like, was it cannabis? Was it hallucinogen? What was going on here? What are they actually encoding in some of these books? Mm-hmm. And so while I was going through this, I came across some information about Johann Chauffeur. Now, this is a guy who is actually from the 1700s, and he is known now as a magical charlatan. And Chris says, quote, Chauffeur was at one time a celebrated Mason. His history, however, has recorded him as a charlatan who came to a bad end as his trail of tricks ran out, leading to an early suicide. One of the things I thought was really interesting about him is that he basically kind of created something which coined the term smoke and mirrors. So one of his big things was that he had a coffee shop, and at the coffee shop he served what he called magic punch. Now the recipe to this is a secret recipe that he would not tell anyone. This was an off-menu offering at his coffee shop, but it basically contained hallucinogenics that would alter the mind of somebody who then would become suggestible to the magic that he was dealing out. One of the things he did was he would run these shows that he would fill rooms with smoke, and he would have mirrors on the wall, tilted mirrors, and he would have a projector behind him, and he would project images onto the mirrors, and then that mirror would bounce back what looked like an apparition or some sort of image that he had conjured up, but it was actually just the projection of that image through the mirror. And so this was a huge sensation for people, especially back in the 1700s. And what it led to was what was known as the Phantasmagoria show. And this was really famous in Paris during the Revolutionary War. And why I bring this up is because this rides the thin line between kind of what we were talking about with the well-dressed person maybe looking good, but actually on the inside not being very favorable. Same thing with this. It was like this was the smoke and mirrors glamour for him to bring people into his establishment to basically make money off of them, manipulate them into thinking they were seeing something magical and something otherworldly when it was actually all just his own projection.
Right. Very interesting. So I'm assuming this was a projection of light, right?
Yes.
Okay, right. And so this reminds me, I mean, there's so many examples of this. Two quick ones. One, just the fact that you go into a grocery store, you're being manipulated immediately.
Oh, yeah.
That's magic, right? And so the way everything is laid out, they basically know how you're going to react when you enter that space and what ads to put where, what items to put where, how to lay out the store. So from the music to the bakery's a big one because you smell baked goods, you're going to be hungry, you're going to buy more food, you know, to just basically everything about it. I know there's some malls, if I'm not mistaken, they'll even put stuff in the air, you know, into the air conditioning system. So they're putting things into the actual environment like that to manipulate you. And an older example of this kind of magic, especially the suggestion sort of side of things, is there are tales of these old kings that would basically get young men They would bring them to a mountain or some remote area, and these men were of fighting age, and they would basically give them drugs for the first time, and they would bring women there as well. They would bring food there, and pretty much their experience would be not unlike paradise. And so there's girls there, there's anything you want. And if you're just a young man from a village, I mean, you're having the time of your life. And if I'm not mistaken, there's variations of this sort of technique, and that they would tell them you are in paradise. So if you want to return here in the afterlife, then you have to fight for the kingdom, or you have to fight for the empire, or something along these lines. But basically, they would be in such a suggestible state that their allegiance for the kingdom or the king or the empire would be so strong after that, that it just made really, really formidable warriors, pretty much. And so to me, this is another example, right? And so using drugs to sort of get your way and to suggest or implant something in somebody, very, very, very old technique. And again, it reminds me of MK Ultra mind control stuff, right? There's a lot of things going on with that too.
This brings me to something else along these lines, basically about manipulation. This idea comes from a book I have called The Master Book of Herbalism by Paul Barrel. And he talks about basically the difference between using magic to understand yourself more, or to gain deeper insight about a situation, or to gain something like patience for a situation, versus using magic to manipulate or to basically gain power or gain an object. And he has a really grounded take on the difference between that and the fact that using it for the latter reasons is actually really not a good decision. And it kind of wanes more on the side of black magic. Talking about the things that we're bringing up, these references, it reminds me more of black magic. Come to find out too, like I was saying, the man I was bringing up, Johann Chauffeur, he killed himself. So he ended up spiraling into a really dark place and probably having such crippling guilt with all the things that he did throughout his lifetime to try and kind of swindle all these people. He thought that the only way out was suicide. But, you know, this is kind of the result of the more negative connotations or the negative uses of magic.
You know, you don't get anything for free.
Right.
And so if you're going to be manipulating people, and if you're going to be basically a con man, then you don't just get away unscathed, in my opinion. You are affecting yourself, essentially, as you're doing those things. And this says something about your internal landscape. And so there could be a whole conversation about the differences that some people perceive with white magic versus black magic. And just to say, there's a whole long history of magicians whose lives did not end very well.
Right.
And so definitely proceed with caution if this is your thing. I'll say it does have a way of attracting people who are willing, I think, to live kind of on the razor's edge. You know, people who maybe are risk takers and whatnot. And so, yeah, definitely you have to be careful with how you approach all this stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that Paul says in his book is, quote, "I give you my word that not one person that I have seen do, quote, black magic is happy." Mm-hmm. And that kind of says it all right there. And I would agree with him. And, you know, to be honest, whether it's white or black magic, I've never been a person that is into spells or doing things like this. And to each their own, that's fine. It's just experiences I've had in my life watching other people do those things and seeing what plays out for them has always made me be more cautious of stuff like that.
Right. As you said, to each their own. I think the symbolism is interesting. Obviously, that's why we're here doing this. And so, as you can see, just kind of like Mercury, there's so many different approaches. There's so many different angles. There's so many different threads here. And so the fact that Mercury is often associated with magic, to me, makes a lot of sense just with this conversation, and how we could talk about the drug use. You could talk about visuals, colors, numbers, propaganda, subliminal messaging, you know, all of these different things. And this feels like we're just scratching the surface too.
Oh yeah, big time.
And just to add to that briefly, let's not forget Mercury's association with thieves, con artists, tricksters, charlatans, and all these other types of things. And so to me, it just would make sense that this sort of study or this sort of practice would attract those types of people as well, as we're highlighting.
Hello, and thank you for having me. This is my voicemail. This is Brandon Lee of Magus in the Media, a channel dedicated to exploring mythology, philosophy, magic, occultism, symbolism, and esotericism through media of all kinds. It's everywhere. It's in our films, literature, anime, comic books, popular culture. It's all around us. We actually can't get away from it. We're taking it in at all times. What drew me towards symbolism in my past, in my youth, and its deeper functions, it was a slow realization, even though it hit me in the face with Carl Jung, and it hit me in the face with these other explorations, these techniques of consciousness change. I realized that stories were affecting people, affecting me at a level that had nothing to do with just it being entertainment. Like I was trying to get away from something. Something was actually moving beneath the surface, and that something had a name, and that name is a symbol. Symbols aren't just signs. The stop sign at the corner tells you to halt. That's just a sign. That's pure, it's telling you information. A symbol, in the magical sense, is something else entirely. It's participatory. It carries agency. Its meaning is not just received. It's lived through. A magical symbol doesn't represent something external. It becomes actually a bridge between consciousness and whatever consciousness is actually trying to reach past itself towards. It has layers for the psyche, for the imagination, for ritual, for memory, for reality itself. Symbols emerge exactly where language runs out. A true symbol holds excess amounts of meaning. You cannot exhaust it through just explaining it. The moment you think you fully mapped a symbol, it opens up into something else. That's the nature of the thing. And yet the symbol, it has its own nature and its own force. The symbol, through time, can actually change as you change with it. Something to think about. And this is why every serious magical tradition, serious magician, is built on symbolic architecture, alchemy, tarot, astrology, sacred geometry, mythic imagery, legends, folklore. These were never meant just to be quaint, pre-scientific superstitions. They were technologies, symbolic maps of transformation designed to orient human consciousness towards what it cannot reach directly. The tree of life in Kabbalah is not actually just a diagram that's owned by one culture. You actually can find it everywhere. Different names, different attributions, the same underlying structure, a map to explain the inexplainable. Now, here's where it gets actually crucial. Symbols organize human perception. Again, symbols organize human perception. Even though it is a metaphor, all language is metaphorical, yet human beings orient themselves through the symbolic world constantly. But we must take the symbolic world away from the abstract and embody it into our actual participatory experience with the world. That's the magical act. Religions and nations and brands and political mythologies, fictional heroes, rituals, social identities, even algorithms are all symbolic layers, all pointing towards something that they're actually not. But it requires us to move through them to understand what they're actually carrying. That movement, that act of moving through the symbol could be called, or is, the initiation. Symbols shape attention. Attention shapes awareness. Awareness shapes consciousness. And consciousness shapes action. It's intentionality towards something, the objective, the phenomenal world. This is exactly where magical traditions locate their power. The use of symbols as visualization, sigils, ritual correspondences, divine names. These aren't just like decorations, jewels, pretty things. That's the exoteric. But the esoteric, it has a living reality. It works on you directly. The mechanism by which reality becomes legible to you, it is the mechanism for change. It is the background structure of how we move through the world, how our psyches interact with the phenomenal. And here's the problem we are living inside right now. Those same mechanisms are being used against us all. Corporations and governments have taken symbols from the magical and the mythological traditions and inverted their meaning and now have weaponized them. Every advertising campaign that hijacks your desire, every political image that bypasses your critical faculty, every media cycle that collapses complex reality into simple iconography. This is symbol work. This is magic used in service of a very specific agenda. When we understand that, we understand what the stakes actually are. That these symbols are being used against you, to possess you, to take control of you, so you do not have control of your own agency. So you are not participating, but you are now being used. Because symbols that you do not understand do not just leave you in some neutral place or just like bypass you. They act on you anyway. The archetypes, these deep functional patterns in the psyche, do not wait for your conscious consent. If you're not relating to them deliberately, they possess you from below. I'm not being dramatic. Again, that's not me being metaphorical, even though there is metaphor there. This is what Carl Jung was pointing at when he talked about inflation, projection, individuation, and unconscious identification. The symbol operates whether you know it or not. But the other side of that is also true. When you can see the symbol, when you can name it, read its history, understand its function, you now gain some kind of leverage. You can begin to relate to it rather than be driven by it. And then it becomes a tool of expansion rather than a mechanism of control. You move from the personal unconscious into the collective unconscious. You start seeing the chariot in the car that drives past. You see the lovers and the couple walking down the street. You see the sun in a moment of clarity, and you can recognize it as the good, as the outward extension of the forms in the Platonic sense. The symbol becomes a living lens. The symbol is then not just some abstract concept somewhere else. The magical act is the act of the true, authentic artist, of the magi, of the mystic. We use it to become human. It uses us to become lived. This is where mythology and magic converge on storytelling, because good stories, truly amazing stories that resonate us at our soul, it's not just to get away from our normal lives, but it's something that enlivens us, that pulls us out of the abyss, out of despair, and it becomes something more. It becomes a symbolic architecture operating on the psyche at depths we truly just cannot understand. But that's why we're here, and that's what we're doing, trying to understand it through the lived experience. Now, the hero, in the Campbellian sense, Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey, is an archetypical pattern that we internalize and replicate. We become Luke Skywalker. We become Neo, Frodo, Apollo, Sung Jin Woo, Goku, Vegeta, or any other ancient mythic figure that has ever moved us, because those patterns mirror internal psychological and spiritual realities that are already present in us. We descend into the cave. We wake in the darkness. We find our way out. We confront the shadow. We move through death and rebirth, sacrifice, transformation. And I'm not talking about other people. These maps are within us. That's what's happening inside us. But it's not just inside us, it's outside us. The inside outside us is actually an experience of our own agency actualizing itself in the symbolic transformation of who we are. The rituals that magical traditions have preserved externalize that same inner movement through symbolic action. The outer symbol and the inner state begin to reflect one another, reinforce one another, and eventually the division between them starts to blur. This is what it means for a symbol to be lived. That is why myth, magic, and meaning cannot be separated from each other. And that is ultimately what Magus and the media is here to do. Yes, academically, we want to analyze these things, but actually we want to show that magic is in all things, that symbolism runs through every story and every piece of media being produced right now, and that whether those symbols are being used for you or against you depends almost entirely on whether you can see them or not. And if you can see them, you can work with them. And if you can work with them, you become something more than just a receiver. You become a magician. Because if acting is interacting, then we are all already inside this drama, this great symbolic play. The question is whether we are conscious participants or unconscious ones. That magic is not somewhere outside of us waiting to be found. We are the magic being enacted. You can find me at Magus in the Media on YouTube, X, Instagram, and all other major platforms. Thank you to Symbolic Studies for having me. Symbolism and magic are nearly one and the same. You cannot reduce a symbol to a sign, cannot reduce it to its information. You cannot reduce it to what it points at. It is something you move through. It moves through you, and when that happens consciously, deliberately, with attention, that is where transformation begins. Thank you.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much for that contribution. I'm glad you submitted something for the show. And I want to talk about what you last mentioned here regarding magic moving through you. I completely agree with that. And it reminds me a lot of, once again, the magician card. So the magician is famously holding his wand up to the heavens, pointing his other hand down to the ground. He himself is almost like a pillar or like a wand unto himself. This is the first card of the major arcana. That vertical one, that straight up and down line, it's not unlike the wand, right? And so the wand is all about energy being sent forth. So if you're going to cast a spell or a magical intention using a wand, if you watch a movie where there's witches and wizards and wands, they're going to point it where they want to cast that spell, right? It just reminds me of energy moving up towards the heavens, towards the divine. And so this reminds me as well of what you mentioned regarding what a symbol is. And I believe you said bridge. And that is actually the word I tend to use as well. It's a bridge to a higher concept. It's a bridge to a higher order. And so every symbol is a symbolic support or bridge to another sort of concept entirely. And so a cat or a tree or a color is a representation of something of a higher order. That's one way of looking at it. So in that way, the magician is also a bridge to the divine. I've gotten into this in other presentations and whatnot, but really it's speaking to the magician being the bridge between heaven and earth. And that we are all in this great triad relationship with all that is above and all that is below. And we are the axis or the world tree or the symbolic pole or wand between the above and below. So that's kind of how I tend to interpret things. And rightly so, symbols cannot just be simply stated, and that's just the definitive end of the line, the totality of meaning behind a symbol. He mentioned the fact that symbols change and that symbols can evolve over time and things like that. Just like what Thomas was saying, there's symbols that can be inverted and they can be flipped and they can be distorted and things like that. And so what's said is that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it's amazing that month after month, we have people submit voicemails about the different signs, and there's generally very little overlap with what people have to say about these signs, even though we're talking about the exact same thing. And so every symbol, absolutely, whole volumes could be written about them. You also said something about symbols, even if they're not understood, they still act on you. And that's definitely true. And I think that part of being symbolically literate is being aware of how many symbols there actually are out there and how they're being used against us. So if you increase your symbolic literacy, you don't see a billboard the same way. You don't see a movie the same way. You don't listen to an album the same way. You're actually hearing another layer of information. You're seeing another layer of information. It's pretty interesting, actually. There's a few movies that I watched well before I was symbolically literate, and had no interest in occultism or anything like that. And then I watched it after becoming very interested in all these topics. And what I took away from the film was incredible. One of them actually is just a classic movie, but The Wizard of Oz. Looking at The Wizard of Oz, and if you know about magic, occultism, symbolism, all these things, you basically are going to take away way more from it than if you knew nothing about this stuff. And so that's kind of another interesting thing too, since you brought up films and pop culture, as did Thomas, and that's kind of part of the weave today, is the fact that two people can watch the exact same thing, and depending on their awareness of all this stuff, they're going to take completely different things away from the film. And so really good movies, I think, kind of operate this way, where a younger person can maybe watch it and they're going to take one thing out of it. someone who's really studied in this type of material may take something very, very different out of it, but it's still valuable, to both viewers. And so I think a lot of good art can kind of operate this way. Take Stanley Kubrick as an example. You can watch a Stanley Kubrick movie like The Shining, and it's a popcorn movie, and it's spooky, and there's interesting things going on. But then you can really analyze the hell out of it and take away a whole new layer of meaning. And of course, he's kind of known as being that director. Symbolic awareness is almost like unveiling a whole new world or shedding light on something. So now when I go on a hike, as an example, every tree is the world tree. And I have this new appreciation for everything that I'm kind of seeing out there because I've decided to really pursue this as a serious study. And so now every little thing, when we watch the birds and we're just doing very simple things, to the person who is quote unquote hip to this type of stuff, they're going to have a whole other realization with what they're seeing and what they're actually perceiving.
Well, speaking of shedding light on something, I really liked what Brandon said. Thank you for your voicemail, by the way, about awakening in the darkness. So of the cave or of the abyss or whatever that looks like to you, because as you come to realize when you are starting to do internal work, the shadow work is where most of the gems are, the hidden gems that you have to uncover and that you have to work through and that you have to go through the pain or the misfortune, seemingly misfortune, I'll say, of being in those dark spaces. But what you come to realize is that those dark spaces actually do, as you said, shed light on the things that we really need to know about ourselves. And I think ultimately, when people are practicing magic or when we're talking about these magic things, what you're really maybe trying to get to, or the main intention, is to find out these deeper truths about yourself, about the universe, about the object that you're focused on, or what have you. There's really something special to be said about the awakening within the darkness.
Right. You know what it kind of reminds me of a little bit? I love the metaphor that people have put out there that I've read, the difference between the fool and the magician and the elemental correspondence between the two. The fool has his bag, and I like the idea that this bag contains the elements, but they're in this sack that's unorganized. Yet in the magician card, the following card, those elements and the tools that correspond with the elements, so the wand, the pentacle, the sword, the chalice, they're all on the magician's table. So they're organized. And so they're visible. They're seen. And so we're going from this symbolic, unseen dynamic of the elements in the bag towards this seen, organized sort of dynamic with the magician. And so that's kind of one way I tend to look at it. The fool sort of represents chaos, and then the magician represents order. Chaos has a whole entire correspondence with things that are dark, things that are hidden, things that are mysterious, and order has a whole entire relationship with daylight, with what's visible, what's seen, things like that. And speaking of the unseen, I think it's interesting, and I'm so glad he brought up weaponized symbolism, because that is really, I would say, the age we're kind of living in that everything in the modern world, especially the modern Western world, I would say, at least in my opinion, is inverted or distorted or askew in some way, shape, or form. So you're not getting the aligned version of anything. You're getting the misaligned version of the thing. And so you take as an example, I think maybe just on a pure symbolic level, one of the best examples of this would be the swastika. The swastika in some parts of the world is one of the most revered, respected symbols there is. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, I have a whole entire weave with it, with the northern sky, it representing Ursa Major, but it really represents the turning or the churning of the cosmos. It's just the turning of heaven, the wheel of heaven. But yet in today's world, it represents something that's very sinister. It represents something that's extremely negative. It represents hate and racism and all the things that are associated with it in the modern world. And so you can't even reference it, or you can't even use it in any way, shape, or form, because again, we're living in more distorted times. We're living in the modern world. So a lot of things that are holistic and that are balanced are obviously sort of flipped on their head now. So I couldn't agree more. Weaponized symbolism, absolutely. This speaks to the propaganda angle that we were talking about earlier. And seemingly all of these symbols are used, in my opinion, not to bring you towards center, but actually away from it. In sort of my worldview, what is considered initiatory is what brings you closer to your center, and what brings you away from center could be considered counter initiatory. And we're basically living in the age of counter initiation. So all of these things that actually have value behind it, that's not sort of the way it's presented to us right now. On an individual level, however, you can change your consciousness and you can change your awareness and have an appreciation and see the true value behind these signs and symbols. But it's not happening on a mass level. I'll just put it that way.
Hello all, my name is Dakota, also known as Iria Harmonia from New Aquarian Astroharmonology. Today I have my 2 cents that I'd like to give regarding the symbolism of magic for Mario's upcoming podcast. Something extremely interesting that I found in Jason Miller's book, Consorting with Spirits. He has a map of the planes that is laid out very similar to most Western esoteric models, where you've got the physical plane, the astral plane, the mental plane, and the causal plane. But then you have the overlap planes in between those. So, for example, the etheric plane is considered the overlap plane between the physical and the astral. Well, in his book, he places a plane called symbol space between the astral and the mental. And this is the only place I've ever seen this depicted, where it's described as just as the etheric level bridges the physical and the astral, this level bridges the astral and mental levels. It is at this level that pure information manifests into space, and the higher, subtler levels of astral space collapse into pure manifestation. It is from this level that the more effective seals, sigils, mandalas, and magical circles come. Pure information expressed symbolically and spatially. And I feel that's because symbols are the perfect containers for both mental energy and emotional astral energy. You know, you look at the flag of a nation, it contains a lot of symbolic mental information about that country and the history of the country and the things that it's done. But then the emotional impact that also has had on people is astral energy. And so when a person looks at a flag, they've also got not just the mental information of everything about that flag in that country, but also the emotional information of everything that they've ever had to do with that flag. Hope y'all have a great podcast, and I'll talk to y'all later. Thank you for listening.
All right, Dakota, thank you so much for that voicemail. I really appreciate it. And I love hearing different takes, right? And a lot of times these takes, I kind of put them on a shelf and maybe they kind of bear fruit later. But I love just hearing different perspectives on all this stuff. It's interesting, as you lay it out based on that book, that the symbol plane is dead center in between the physical and astral and then the mental and causal. So the fact that symbolism occupies this space in between really, to me, represents this bridge dynamic that we were just talking about. So once again, it would be in between the astral and mental. He brought up the causal, mental, astral, and physical. So symbolism would be right there in the middle. This makes a lot of sense with what I understand it to be as well, and kind of makes sense with what others were saying today. And so this is why symbolism, occupies such an important place in humanity, and that we all gravitate towards symbolism. There's no way to not sort of have this in your life in some way, shape, or form. Interestingly enough, the way we tend to interpret it as modern people, we really tend to think of the visual aspect of it. And we're very, very visual people. And my understanding is that more nomadic peoples, way, way, way back when, which we all come from a nomadic foundation, that nomadic peoples, their symbolism was actually more auditory, that they really had this preference for everything audible. So I've mentioned this before, but poetry, the spoken word, the oral tradition, music, things like that. Their symbolism was more like that. I would say for most modern Western people, that we tend to really, really emphasize the shape and the color, the form and the silhouette. That's sort of more of our wheelhouse. But with that said, I appreciate the call and your insights.
You ask, can a symbol change a reality? And this question and the symbol of the eye in the triangle and the rays emanating, which you had on your Instagram page, it stopped me. And then the question, can a symbol change your reality? Well, that stopped me too, because I can answer in all honesty, yes, it can. I came to know this symbol deeply, but it didn't start with a course or an interest in magic or symbolism. It started with a painting. And within the painting was a mystery. I didn't know it then, but there was just something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and I couldn't leave it alone. And I spent 4 years researching this mystery, and it grew, and it grew into this symbol. The one painting became two and became three, two paintings of opposites, and a third painting that brought them into union. The eye became awakening consciousness, my own, and the rays are the expansion that is ongoing today, and in my personal view, infinite. So first I felt, and then I saw, and now I believe. And it's as if the symbol was already latent in me, seeking expression. And I feel with a sign, you can believe in a sign, and maybe you actually need to believe in a sign. But a symbol works on the subconscious level. It is less a belief or an instruction, and in my view, it is a remembering. And symbols are the language through which remembering becomes visible.
All right, Victoria, thank you so much for that voicemail, that personal voicemail with your experience here with the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, and how basically you developed this relationship with it that unfolded over time. And definitely symbolism works that way for sure. There's been so many times I've been doing a tarot reading with somebody and the reading presents a symbol or something very specific that we're talking about that over the following months really turns into something else for that person. And the person says, oh, what's really funny is when we talked about this card or this specific symbol, I didn't understand how it relates to my life. Now I understand how it relates to my life, right? And I have my own experience with a few symbols that are kind of like that, that presented themselves early on, that later on I really came to realize the significance of them in my life. And I love what you said regarding remembering as well. You know, there's almost something to be said, some people have put out there, when you are learning something, are you learning it for the first time or are you actually remembering something? But I think symbols are an excellent tool to remember, and there's all sorts of different techniques out there that you can employ using symbolism to help with your memory recall, as Nick was talking about with Giordano Bruno.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I really enjoyed the fact also that you brought up remembering, because this is such an important aspect in life, but I think also when we're dealing with symbolism, because each symbol is going to be tied to a specific personal experience for each individual. So one symbol may make someone feel really great, while that same symbol is going to make a different person feel negative.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think of the skull. That's the first one that came to mind. How many people love skull artwork and tattoos and they have t-shirts with it versus someone else, you know, they're going to be completely adverse to that.
Yeah, exactly. And so something to keep in mind when we're thinking about this stuff, that we're all having our own very individual experience here. And that's important to remember when we're walking through life. But I think specifically when we're talking about things like magic and symbolism, because people have their own intentions, regardless if they're, quote, good or bad intentions, it really doesn't matter. In my opinion, intention is one of the main roots, if not the main root of magic.
Well, maybe one last thing I'll say here regarding the remembering aspect of symbolism. I've said this many times, but in my opinion, it seems as though everything emanates from a center and returns back to that same center. So all symbols are symbolic or representative of that original center. You can call it the supreme principle. I think a great word actually is source as well. So all symbols are an emanation from source and are reflective of source. So it would make sense that symbolically, we essentially have this relationship with symbols that do have this memory attachment because it all came from the same place, including us, including our psychology, including everything that we kind of are experiencing right now. And you can take it even further, and instead of saying we've emanated from that center and returned back to it, we're still within it. Everything actually is. And that really, everything that you experience here is of that principle, essentially. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. I really enjoyed recording this one. I'm so glad we decided to branch off and do a second podcast exploring symbolism beyond the zodiac. But with that said, we will see you next time for an episode on the symbolism of Cancer.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Can't wait for the next one.
Okay, this wraps up the live recording Michelle and I made on Thursday, June 4th. What a fun episode that was to record and do research for. Many thanks to everyone who contributed a voicemail this episode, whether you decided to submit something on your own or by request. I'm grateful for your insights. Georgina Rose, aka Dot Darling, can be found at Dot Darling on YouTube and social media. That's DAATDARLING. And also be sure and check out her book, Planetary Theurgy. Thomas, aka Paranoid American, can be found at paranoidamerican.com and also Paranoid American on YouTube and social media. Nick from The Occult Rejects can be found at The Occult Rejects on YouTube and social media. You can also visit his site, occultresearchinstitute.org. Brandon from Magus in the Media can be found at Magus in the Media on YouTube and X. You can also find him at Instagram under the same name with underscores between each word. As always, you can explore the Symbolic Studies archive for early podcast access, exclusive lectures, symbolic research, and more. Visit symbolicstudies.com to sign up. Once again, in case you weren't aware, I'm also available for tarot readings and private lessons. You can schedule a session on my website if you'd like to have a private one-on-one session with yours truly. Also, I have to mention the fact that symbolism came across my radar due to being a graphic designer. I've been designing for nearly 30 years now, so if you're in need of creative assistance with your project, check out my portfolio on my site and get in touch. Links to all of my accounts can be found at symbolicstudies.com. And if you're primarily a podcast listener, I really encourage you to check out my short form videos that I post on Instagram and everywhere else. But I pack a lot into a short amount of time, and honestly, I think it's some of my best work. And once again, if you finished this episode and want even more insights, we'll be releasing a companion episode where Michelle and I continue the conversation in After Hours. And that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you next month with a show on the symbolism of Cancer. Until then.